Welcome back to the Factor Care Podcast. It's me and Stephen Lee again, and we have two special guys that are important in my life. Maybe we could start with Mr. Dave, with you talking about how amazing your oldest is, and then my dad will talk about how amazing his oldest is. No, I have. I'll let you guys do your own intro, but if you would, Mr. David.
Sure. My name's David James, and I am the father of Jonathan James, and who is CEO of Hope Charities. And their mission is basically to help hurting folks with not only hemophilia, mostly hemophilia, but with chronic illnesses.
Yeah, they diversified, which initially it was Hope for Hemophilia, and then got changed over to Hope Charities.
Well, there's still a Hope for Hemophilia, and then Hope Charities. It's kind of umbrellaed under it, but there's both still in existence. Yes.
Okay, and he's still over there.
I think that name's pretty familiar with anyone in the community because Jonathan's done so much for so many people that it's great to have someone that was involved in his upbringing here on the channel today, and to be joined by Mr. Sam too, and let us know about how he affected the upbringing of not only Josh, my partner next to me, but maybe myself. So that's an interesting story that we can get into. But so tell us about raising Jonathan, I guess you can say, or raising a hemophiliac son.
Sure. Well, it was a surprise to us. And of course, you need his mother here to tell you the real story. So.
I'll do that.
But from a father's standpoint, of course, obviously, the initial news of it was just heartbreaking. You're kind of numb when you hear those words that you don't even know what they mean. Never had heard the word hemophilia before that. Jonathan we do not have any history of hemophilia in my wife's family, my family, so it was totally new to us and our family. So it's quite a shock there. But one thing I'd say about Jonathan from the beginning, he has never complained, and that's always struck me amazing, because he has suffered throughout his life more than any person I've ever known. So I'm not sure. There's so many details. The story is, but the truth is that really, as a father, you're just wanting to do everything you possibly can to find the best help, the best care,
right? And
that's what we did.
What year was Jonathan?
He was born in 1978. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you guys were living in Texas at the time?
We were living in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. The first year, we didn't know what the problem was. We knew there was a problem because my wife would pick him up literally out of his cradle, and in a few minutes, her handprints bruised him. You could see her fingers. So we knew something was wrong.
Yeah.
And we actually have an old video of when he was less than a year, and I'm rolling around with him on the floor, and his elbow is jammed up. And we don't know anything at this stage.
Yeah.
And we'd actually gone back to his pediatrician. They almost didn't release him from the hospital with Mom because when he was circumcised, he continued to bleed. And the pediatrician just was absolutely ignorant of hemophilia.
Okay.
And but anyway, long story short, that elbow, I'm sitting there thinking, it just needs to be stretched out. And I was sitting there doing damage to him. That breaks your heart when you find out later that what you were doing was causing more damage. And of course, as you know, Josh, his elbow has had multiple surgeries, replaced a couple of different times, and that was the beginning of that. And that was very hard as a father.
You guys came, what year did you guys move?
1993. January of 93, we moved to Louisiana, and the sole purpose was I started searching the year before And basically the reason we started trying to find a way away from Texas, if you will, when Jonathan was born, there was a fund that was called Texas Crippled Children's Fund that helped supplement the insurance. Now, we had insurance when he was born, and but it had $1 million cap. Well,
Sounds familiar.
yeah, so we ran out of the cap, and then we were thrown into this Texas Crippled Children's Fund, in which they were very generous, very kind, but it ran out of money. And when it ran out of money, the only answers that seemed to be on the table were for Debbie and I to get a divorce, and this literally came directly from our congressman's office. That he suggested. He didn't call me. He didn't have the courage himself to call me, but he had one of his staff people call me after I'd sent letter after letter, and they ended up calling me and saying, well, what the congressman suggests is that you and your wife get a divorce, and she starts getting supplemental Social Security,
Medicaid, welfare.
Right. She would qualify for that, and she's young, still live together, and this, that, and the other. Well, that was totally unacceptable to us. So, and we were being forced into government help at that stage because the Crippled Children's Fund had really run out of funds. Wow. And that's what caused us to start looking around. Well, the first state we thought we would be moving to was Tennessee, but they also had $1 million cap on their. You could move to Tennessee. They would help Jonathan for up to $1 million. And I remember asking when I talked to the people on the phone, I said, well, what happens when you run out of that cap? What happens when you get to the $1 million cap? He said, well, you just have to move to another state.
Wow.
I said, well, I can't move my family. I don't want to move my family every 3 years.
Wow.
So we started looking, and here in Louisiana, there was a physician at Tulane that he was very proactive in coming to the legislature, the state legislature, and he basically told them that if you don't put some funds aside for these hemophiliac kids, they're going to be dropping like flies. Well, that was actually the beginning. That he was doing that as the AIDS was getting more and more prevalent, if you will. And I don't know the history of him because I never met him, but I understand that basically there were some problems with that physician because he had so many patients with the HIV virus, and that wasn't the problem. But, and again, I don't know this, so I probably shouldn't say. But the point being is that he was not here when we got here, but he was the one instrumental in getting the program that helped us to move to Louisiana. Now that program has since changed, as you know.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's what moved us to Louisiana.
Wow. But in this short period of time, I mean, as patients, we don't know what it's like raising a hemophiliac. We were just raised it, and hearing all the things that you had to navigate through, is so important for other families that are thrown in the same shoes that, they may not have the information, and you had to do a lot of research, but gladly through a platform like this, we're able to help them maybe seek guidance or bring awareness to the situation. Because, man, I can't imagine being thrown into the mix and it's, your son has hemophilia. I don't know what that is, but figure it out.
No, it's hopefully encouraging to a lot of people too, is Dad and Mr. David are telling the stories, because us being kids, obviously I wanted to see the perspective, and Jonathan and I have talked about this so much, about doing something similar to this, even going to dinner to just sit down and pick y'all's brains, because for us it's just like, okay, I'm uncomfortable, just grind it out. But to be having my own kids now, and everybody's different in so many ways in how their perspectives are, but I wanted to hopefully make this an encouraging conversation, because it's so much better, the treatments. You had the tainted blood supply issue, which you referred to, which was rampant with hepatitis, HIV.
Right.
In fact, I think Jonathan and I, at different times, were both. Dad can talk about that a little bit more, but we had both had to kind of get rushed over to the hospital to get
Oh yeah.
evaluated and have blood work done, because they would show up at the door and take the medication back if it was a tainted lot.
Right.
And I can't imagine. I try to think through these things now as a parent, and to try to process that. And I understand. It was just like there was a lot of, you're not alone, but you're alone. I know my parents had an incredible support system,
And we did too.
with the church and just
Right.
extended family,
We did too.
which Jonathan's told me. It seems like our paths were very, very similar. But yeah, 78 was long before. You were in 74.
I was born in 84.
They didn't start heat treating medications
85.
until
85.
wow.
So
Yeah.
I mean, he had a pretty good span of time which he could be affected. But also another thing that was a great point that you brought up is how that doctor at Tulane was able to advocate for the group.
Right.
I mean, that's basically what still needs to be done. I mean, if
Right.
we can't allow the insurance companies to decide what our health outcomes are going to be. Yeah. We should all strive to have the best treatments available and access to it. Whether I understand we live in a capitalistic country and it has to be, they can make a profit, but at the same time is to tell the insurance that's makes some of the most money in the world for them to tell us that, hey, we are not going to pay for more of your medicine because we're putting a cap on you. We're putting a cap. It's like, well, you're making millions of dollars, billions of dollars a year. Get some people some help. So, I mean, that's important that, the people out there that's listening in, it's like, hey, if you got to advocate for yourself, but collectively we can make more of a bigger noise,
We're even having, I think they chalked mine up to genetic mutation after they did the process. What did they say?
It was a spontaneous problem that occurred
Okay.
at the moment of conception,
Okay.
that there was some type of enzyme that either touched the sperm or the egg and damaged the factor 9 chain link. That's what we were told by Duke University.
Yeah, he was 78, I was 80. So, Dad, maybe you can tell some of the backstory there with.
Well, I'm Josh's dad, so
So he had to come, is what he's saying. Drug him one year.
our road was a little bit different, but not a whole lot. Being factor 9, Christmas disease, it was a little different than 8. Not a little, a lot, frankly, I believe.
Yeah.
Especially being severe. So we only had to treat you when you were injured. And your first injury is when you were 6 months old. Now, the way that we discovered you had hemophilia is they did the PKU test, and it wouldn't stop bleeding. And our pediatrician immediately was alarmed by that and did a series of tests at Methodist Hospital in New Orleans East. And they determined that you had hemophilia and took us straight to the clinic at Tulane, which was a real blessing. We didn't have any 2 or 3 year downtime where we were trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
We didn't have a clue what we were doing. Your mom, she was working as a paralegal downtown, and I was a pastor. We didn't have insurance, and we didn't get any insurance for several years because we couldn't afford it. And the program that, David, that you're referring to was here in the, I know the doctor who did that. He's actually the one who moved to Duke and took over part of the head hematology over there many years ago. What was going on at that time was it was just so dramatic what we were having to deal with, because we would have to take you to the hospital to have you infused, go through that fight you've always been a warrior child. You would fight tooth and nail. You had all the energy of a mad lion you would sweat like a pig, and we'd have the worst time in the world holding you down.
Sure, I can't imagine.
Just to get a vein,
Yeah.
They would tie you up in sheets and do all this stuff.
The board.
Yeah,
They're gonna get
yeah.
rid of the board.
Well, I don't know if y'all know about obviously you know about the
They
board.
strap 'em down the board.
Oh.
But I took my daughter to Children's, and obviously she's not too fond of needles either because she's a small child. And I was like, y'all don't have the bar you could strap her down to? And the hospital goes to me. They go, no, that's considered child abuse now. We're not allowed to do that. And I was like, wow.
Well, let me put it to you like this. Josh had no problem getting out of that board.
I've broken one myself.
It would take an ER doctor and 2 nurses and Jody and I holding him, even when he was little, when he was a year old. By the time he was 2, we began to infuse him at home because we couldn't afford to take him to the hospital. Just the ER bill alone was, at that time, $1,100. Wow. I was making $13,000 a year. Wow. That was my gross pay, so that wasn't going to happen. So we went through the same scenario with the government. I went down to Elysian Fields in New Orleans and met with the Social Security Department, told them the situation, which they were already aware of, by the way. And the gentleman told me, he said, the only way we will help you, Mr. Hawkins, is if you will quit working. If you and your wife will not work, we will move you into government housing and we will take care of Josh. I said, well, truthfully, sir, I understand now why this country's headed for trouble, why we're headed directly into it. And I said, no, thank you. That's not an option for me as a believer in Jesus Christ.
Amen.
And we went home. We prayed about it. We asked the Lord what to do. I don't mean to be saying this as self-serving, but this is my life. Christ is the center of my life. He made it clear to us what we should do in your case. What we did was we just turned you loose and let you be normal. And the clinic went ballistic over it.
Yeah.
And Karen was very unhappy with us. And frankly, I didn't blame her.
Yeah.
You know, I wasn't blaming her at all. But the protocol for a child back then through the clinic was, you know, basically sit on the floor, watch TV, memorize cartoons, become as intelligent as possible. Don't do the kind of activities that will compromise you internally, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It all made sense from a scientific perspective, but we knew different.
Yeah.
And I went through the same thing that you went through with Jonathan. We would pick Josh up, and sometimes it would leave our fingerprints bruised on his ribs, and the police were called.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so the police came and investigated this, and I was grateful they did it. Very grateful to them, all of them, for it.
Yeah.
And we had neighbors, because we lived in a small apartment in New Orleans East, and they would call and report the bruises, and the police would tell them, we understand this is a special child. His mom and dad love him. They're not injuring him. That he has a bleeding problem. So when I would come home every day, you and I would go and we would swim in the pool, and then we would take a little collector's box and catch lizards for a couple of hours.
Yeah, I remember that.
Off the
That
holly
was a
bushes.
blast.
You remember that? The anoles, the
Yeah,
chameleons.
yeah. Outside, anything outside. See.
You would chase ducks. We would fish. We ran. We would run till you couldn't stand up anymore.
Yeah. I
Point
remember
being,
a lot of that.
the more exercise, the better.
Yeah.
Because you physically developed into an incredible athlete because of that. God gave you life, and he kept you.
Yeah.
You could have, and because we know numerous times you did receive tainted factor, but you have never had the symptoms of HIV or any of the hepatitis, but you have all the antibodies without any symptoms, which is something that confuses them even to today.
Yeah.
I mean, I could go on with this all
Which
day.
went on to that 7-year study because they were trying to figure out what
They
was
did the
going on with
7-year
this stuff.
study because they thought we were feeding you, some Bulgarian-rooted peanut butter with an unusual herb on it or something. And they were trying to
mission
discover
trip,
it
bring
so
it
they
back
could
in.
feed it to everybody.
That's
But the truth is, it was the Lord that gave you life.
That's right.
yeah.
We had people praying every morning for your life. We had, because our extended families were hundreds and hundreds of miles away, and they could not be there to help us. So the church became our family, and they truly, just whole families would adopt you and do things with you, who weren't afraid to hurt you.
Yeah.
So we went through a process where I think our support system was so good, it was so solid. I can say there were times when Jody and I walked around and we were just zombies because you didn't sleep a lot. And there would be times when I would go to sleep on the floor by your crib. And you little sucker, you would come flying out of that crib 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning, flip off that crib and hit me, wake me up. Because because you wanted to go run around the house.
Wanna play, yeah.
And I'd have to put you right back in there again. So we found all kinds of ways to train you not to do certain things. You learned how to duck your head, but we didn't put a hat on you. We didn't try to, wrap you in bubble wrap or do any of that. We just believed that God had you born for a reason, a purpose, and that if we were very diligent parents, consistent, that he would bring you to the point where you are now, where you're serving this community in a way that few really are. Mm-hmm. And I'm bragging on you because you are, because you consider that your life's work is to help especially other hemophiliacs and people with bleeding disorders and assist them because it is so difficult. Now, how did we pay the bills all those years? Some of it I could explain to you, some I can't. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people just walked in and paid it. Mm. There were times when we went to the blood bank, and they were very gracious and very helpful, and they would supply factor because our church would give blood to the blood bank, and in turn they would allow us to have factor at no cost, especially when you had emergency appendectomy when you were 12. There were a number of different times and things like that. Then we did eventually get into the pool, the high-risk pool it was called. And the state had a wonderful pool, and it did have a limit to it, but it was so helpful. I remember waiting at the post office in downtown New Orleans. I went there at about, they were only going to accept 125 of the first people. And this pool would cover all kinds of disease problems, not just hemophilia. There was a line forever. I mean, you would have thought it was a free concert. But fortunately, I got there 12 hours early and just waited till the door opened. And when the post office popped open, we were like number 124.
Wow.
And you were able to get into the program, and Karen managed that, Karen Wolf. She was just a godsend.
She was amazing.
An incredible woman. She didn't like everything
lives.
we did, but she was very gracious and very kind, and over the years, she learned to trust us.
Well, see, here's the thing about Karen, and everybody has either heard of or knows Karen Wolf, the myth, the legend. And I miss her. I do. I think about her from time to time when I'm talking to a patient, just about a situation that will remind me of a conversation I had with her. And I know I remember being like 8 or 9, and I remember you guys walking outside the door and it closed. And side note to anybody that's in the hospital, you close the door and there's still an inch usually gap underneath the doorway. So I can hear everything inside of it. Mm. And Dad and Mom would just basically listen out to her being upset in her own way, and she was trying to appeal, but sometimes she'd be a little bit more than appealing. And again, I could see that you guys appreciated it and were always respectful to her, but it was more like, I got you, but this is what we're going to do, and this is why. The last time that you came with me to the annual visit that we do at the clinic, the HTC at Tulane, the last time I had seen you guys together, I remembered this. Last time I'd seen you guys together, it was like a polite butting of heads, and she was the aggressor. So there was probably 6 or 7 years in between. We had moved back down from Tennessee to home. Mm-hmm. I was going back there for the first time, and you came with me because you're like, I haven't been over there in forever. Because I'd been at Vanderbilt's HTC while we were living in up there for 6 years. So it'd been about 12 years since you'd seen her. Yeah. And I remember thinking when we're walking into the clinic, like, this will be interesting. Like, the last time I remember, whether they do or not, that they were kind of, and it wasn't that there was a lot of conflict. It was all there for the right reason. Everybody was trying to find the best way to, she was trying to, from almost like an outsider's perspective, say, look, this is what the data tells us to do. Mm-hmm. And you guys were saying, no, this is what that we're basing this on faith and on Christ, and this is what we're going to do. And it was the mindset that I've been repeated back from Mom a lot was you telling them, look, he was given life, and the Lord's going to decide when that, within reason.
What I said is God will number your days. It's God who numbers our days.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that was one of that was part of the conversation, and she was trying to process that. And but when we walked in, you were running behind, and this is why I remember this. She saw me and had seen me like I had, they bring 3, 4, 5. You're seeing different people throughout the day, and I had seen her. She'd pop in between sometimes with someone to kind of get the file to him, and when you walked in, it was like Michael Jordan walked into the room. Yeah. She runs to him, hugs him. It's like I haven't seen her for 6 years. I didn't get that. It's like she's like, I can't believe your dad's coming in. Like it was. She was elated. She was so excited, and I think it was probably too because understanding the updated research data, seeing my progression as a young adult, and then understanding that what you guys did with me was. And for her, the data coming back from all the research saying that it was the optimal thing to do with children like us. Mm-hmm. And I think she really appreciated and respected you standing your ground and what you believed. She was that kind of person.
Yeah.
I really do miss her a lot. That's been rough. But I remember still seeing her face.
But, an important lesson that we're learning from this conversation is, your healthcare team, how can they kind of fit into your life like family. It can be if you have the right relationship.
Yeah.
So make sure that you are close knit and they understand your concerns, and you can stand your ground and you can open up for conversation. But ultimately, hopefully, you can work together to prolong life and just and help us. And Karen is a perfect example.
It was never an argument about science.
Mm-hmm.
It was common sense. The human body is designed for activity, not inactivity.
Mm-hmm.
Inactivity creates weakness. Over time, it really does. And it was just common sense to know to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we weren't doing things that were super risky.
Yeah.
But he hunted, he fished, he played sports. At 9 years old, he started playing baseball. His coach was a good friend and understood the scenario. Now, I'm not saying everyone should do that. But we felt, if we prayed about it, we felt comfortable that he would do that. He ended up being one of the top players in the state. 2 pro teams tried him out, found out he had hemophilia, wouldn't go near him after that. But it was the point being, you don't get that by accident. You got to know what's right, and you have to flow with that. Karen was never our enemy.
No.
We always listened to her.
No, and I don't mean to portray it that way. I didn't mean that at all.
No. Well, I didn't think you did, son. But I didn't want to make it come across that way at all. Without her, I don't know what we would have done. She was an incredible blessing. There was never a moment where something happened that we could not get Karen on the phone and ask her advice about how to deal with this. Because, and David, I don't know if you and your wife ran into this, but there were times when Jody and I would be traveling with Josh, and he would get injured, and we would have to take him into an ER that was unfamiliar to us in the state or out of the state. And there was one particular ER we took him to when he was about 5. No, I guess you were about 7. You had lost a front tooth. And we took you in because you were bleeding profusely, as they do. And we did not have the ability to infuse you at the time. And the ER doctor came over and we explained everything. And he literally walked away. He walked out of the ER. He left his shift and never came back.
Wow.
And we had to drive 4 hours to the clinic in New Orleans to get you treated. Meanwhile, we had you sucking on popsicles. Point being, you never know what you're going to walk into here. And things are so much better now.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
The education is so much greater now. Every step, every day was a learning experience for the hemophilia community.
Yeah.
Especially when they were contracting HIV. And specific other problems, maladies that came through the blood supply. That was a very difficult time to manage. You, David, you mentioned about the congressperson asking or suggesting to you that the best thing you could do is get a divorce. That's what was suggested to me. Because they said if you do that, then you can live apart.
Right.
And one of you take the child, and that one we will provide for.
Right.
And my conscience will not allow me to do that.
No,
I just could not do that. But at that time, the divorce rate was 96% among parents with hemophiliac children.
Wow, didn't know that.
96%,
That's insane.
which that was so destructive.
Right.
And it was so destructive, and it was all based on money.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All of it was based on money. I do think we're in a much, much better day,
Oh yeah.
and the treatments are so much better.
Yeah.
And the communication between treatment centers
Sure.
is so much better.
Sure, and it's not as rare as it once was. I wish it was, but it's not.
You hit it.
Excuse me, go ahead.
No, but you hit a bunch of key points about education's better, therapies are better.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really leading to the future, and a lot of that is learned with our generation. You know how you raised us, but also how we our bodies are keeping up to now. Because I remember, like you mentioned, you were on a as needed basis on your
Very
medication.
fortunate in that too.
Well, the medication was so expensive they wouldn't give it to you if you didn't have a bleed.
That's right.
That's right.
And as we progress and you see hemophiliacs with joint damage and they're realizing that, hey, you know, they're more risk of needing major surgeries down the line that's going to require a lot of factor. They're like, oh, well, maybe if we started them earlier, we could do prophylaxis. And then we went from prophylaxis. Now we have, long-acting products that are still used for prophylaxis. But now we're going, for the hemophilia Bs, we're fortunate going a week or more. Myself personally, on 10 days between doses.
Wow.
And, and
Can
then
you imagine having a child with an inhibitor at that time?
Wow.
No.
Yeah,
I
even
don't
to this
know.
day.
Well, that's why. I mean, so many of them. I mean, you're talking about it running through them like water.
Right.
Every 4 to 6 hours, sometimes
Yeah.
12.
Right.
Well, there are therapies coming up. We can't really mention because they're not out
Right,
yet.
right.
But there are therapies that are going to help people with inhibitors that work outside of the factor pathway.
Wow.
That's already started.
The
That's
studies are going on right now.
Yeah.
The studies are going on right now. I don't want to talk about these companies just in case
Sure.
there's any
Sure,
legal
sure.
issues associated with bringing light to their product. But they have some products coming out. Similar to one of the products out on the market right now that is available is like Hemlibra, which isn't factor 8, but it helps
Sub-Q,
hemophilia A patients. It's sub-Q, and in patients with inhibitors, since it's not factor, it may help the patients that are inhibitor. They're coming out with a product for hemophilia B patients that are similar to that sub-Q, not
Just
actually
having
factor
a
9.
sub-Q product as opposed to trying to intravenously get a needle into someone. It's more like, diabetic type shot.
I try to encourage everyone that the therapies are getting so much better, and obviously some of these are new and it's going to have some teething issues, but you got from a parent standpoint, and y'all have to go through this and learning how to infuse Jonathan or Josh and my mom learning how to inject myself, how much easier it would have been if you didn't have to tie him down and you could just kind of jab on the back of his arm. Just pinch his arm,
what I mean.
jab, 3 seconds is done.
Oh,
10
we
seconds.
would have given a dozen gold coins for that.
But you get what I'm saying? Therapies. So I wanna be optimistic for the people out there listening that therapies are ever changing and it's getting so much better, and our quality of lives are getting better.
The non-concern for the concern, this is part of what we've talked about a lot, is how difficult the process, and for, if you did not have to do an infusion, I don't know if Jonathan had to daily, but if you did not have to do it on demand, how much worse it would be, not just trying to do the injection, but because of the tainted blood supply, being aware of it, which is extremely frightening, knowing, okay, my kid, looking at my boys right now and thinking about, I can not give them this medication and their body is going to degenerate and decompose in front of our eyes and potentially be life-threatening. Or we can infuse them and roll the dice and just, at least not really roll the dice, you know what I'm saying, but just the mindset of knowing what could be in that vial and then still knowing you're going to have to give them that medication. I can't. Yeah, could you touch on that? Because I want to know.
Because from a historical standpoint, I'm not certain exactly what year it was that the HIV really began to explode, but I do remember that at that time, Jonathan was still really young because he was early 80s, and we were still having to take him to the emergency room on a regular basis. We were there a lot.
Yeah.
At the hospital. It's a large hospital today, but back in that day, it was called Cook's Children's Hospital. Still there in Fort Worth, but it was at a much smaller building, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, we would be there at all times of day and night, him having to get infusions. Well, when it really when they first began to say, wait a second, the blood is tainted, first off, they knew it before they exposed it. As y'all know, that's another whole nother conversation. Is exactly right. So, but by this time, everybody knows that it's tainted, and our doctor, Jonathan's doctor, his name was Dr. Miali, and he ended up leaving Fort Worth and became a teacher, I think, in Chicago. I hadn't been able to find him since, but he told us face to face that we were concerned. Well, should we infuse him? I'm scared to death that this HIV virus. And of course, at that time, it was just a death sentence. If you knew someone with AIDS, it was a death sentence.
Right.
So, and we're scared enough as it is just with hemophilia, much less with the AIDS. So, but he says to me face to face, and he was a dear man, and he was as sincere as he could be. He says it would be better to infuse because they'll come up with a cure for AIDS, and we know what will happen if we don't infuse. We know the damage that will happen if we do not infuse him.
Yeah.
And at that juncture, but we went to cryoprecipitate. So you'd be in the hospital for hours getting bags of cryoprecipitate instead of, they just stopped the factor.
Yeah.
Because at that time, all of the factor, from what I understand, again, I'm gray-headed, so forgive me if my memory's not all there. But at that time, it would take 1,000 donors to give Jonathan one shot, to give him one infusion. And he was getting 3 of those a week. Mm-hmm. So he was being exposed to 3,000 people every week.
Yeah.
And the only 2 places in America that produced factor 8 at that time were both in California. And where they were getting their blood was from the blood banks, from the people on the streets, drug addicts who were selling their blood, and from the prisons. That's where they were getting the bulk of their blood. Well, so it wasn't just 3,000 people. It was 3,000 people from a very difficult population.
Compromised.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but that doctor said, and he wasn't, I don't blame him one iota. He was saying what he sincerely believed, and that was that, oh no, it's better to treat because, well, it turned out that many, many, many of those kids did drop like flies. Many of that generation did get HIV out of that same exact clinic. And so did New Orleans. Was really bad.
Yeah, it was.
As you know, I guess you do know.
I still remember. I think it was around our annual was around my birthday. I think a lot of times at Tulane for whatever reason. I don't remember what. It seemed like it did. Not because it was a happy time. I dreaded going to the clinic because I knew they were going to be poking and prodding at me all day. I was going to get stuck a couple times. But I do remember kids. I remember one specific kid. There was 2 brothers, and I remember I would play with them, kind of in the waiting area before they would call us into the back to kind of start the day. And I remember one year, his brother's there. Next year, gone. And I asked where he was, and his brother just didn't say anything. And the mom came over and said, "Look, he had hit his head. We infused him, and it just didn't work."
I had almost that identical experience once at Cook Children's when Jonathan was small during the 80s, where the patients and the parents were in this waiting room, going to clinic. They see multiple doctors, every 6 months or every year, whatever it was. And there was at that time, the conversation between parents was has your child been affected by the HIV virus? And this mom is there with two of her sons. I don't know if they were twins or not, but two sons. And I said, well, have they been impacted by it? She said, yeah, both of them have the HIV virus. And for Jonathan, he never has had it. And yet, statistically, they argued with us. They wanted to test him for a few years. In the early 80s, they wanted to test him. And I said, well, what are you going to do? What's the treatment? What is the change in treatment if he has HIV? And they really, for about 2 or 3 years, they had no answers. I said, well, I don't need to know, because I'm going to live with him every day. I'm going to cherish every day that I have with him.
Yeah. Do you remember, did they ever come to the house and take back any of the factor?
No,
at that point in time?
that didn't happen. But we had many times that we had factor that, and I believe it was the Lord. That's all. The only, I can't explain it any other way.
Yeah.
And nor can I prove that it was the Lord, but I believe it was the Lord. And that was that there were times when Debbie just could not, his mom could not get that infusion to go in. She'd have the needle, the syringe completely full, and you have a butterfly, and then the syringe hooks to the butterfly.
Yeah.
No logical reason why it wouldn't go in, wouldn't go. I mean, so, but there were times like that.
Yes, sir.
Multiple times like that, and all we can say is that, that was just the Lord's protection. My wife said at the time, she says, that must be an angel at the end of the needle.
Yeah.
That could have been the product.
You know what Jody and I did, every time we infused him, every time, and I don't think we ever missed this, we just asked Jesus to kill anything that was in there that did not need to go on your body.
Yes.
Because we knew we were not just in a physical battle, we were in a spiritual war.
Right.
And we knew it.
Right.
And that's what we did.
I just want to chime in, but also put a disclaimer out there for the people listening before they're
Sure.
scared off.
Sure.
Factor products have been scanned for bloodborne pathogens since 1985, so that's not as big as a concern, but doesn't take away
Correct.
from the message. But there are a lot of therapies on the horizon, and coming out right now, but even on the horizon. But it lets you know that though we may not have to worry about the bloodborne pathogens, you got to realize there's going to be therapies in market that we don't know everything about it, and sometimes we don't know until it's too late.
Sure.
So it's up to the patient, the healthcare provider, and their team, their pharmacist staff, or their whoever is around them, to make an informed decision on the products that you want to use, the products that you want to go on. Because let's be honest, I mean, with the way gene therapy is looking, it's going to be the future. These other products for people with inhibitors, I mean, well, for hemophilia in general, but even people with inhibitors is going to help them. But ultimately, we need people out there that are willing to take it, and hopefully there's people that find the calling that they want to help the future of hemophiliacs like ourselves. I know I've been on a study in my high school years, but also there are people that, hey, depending on your situation, you might want to stand back and see how it works, because not all of us are as healthy as everyone else.
Right.
So we need to make that decision like, hey, you know what? I really need, I don't want to add anything onto my plate. I mean, it sounds good, but let's see how it works out in other people. So all I'm saying is just that, for those listening, those new parents, don't be so worried about the bloodborne pathogens, but also you still have to do your homework and still research what you're going to put into your kid's life.
Yeah, don't grab at everything like it's a lifeboat for you,
Correct.
because it may not be. Every person's unique.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let me give you one experience that lines up with that. This is Jonathan was having trouble with his ankle. Multiple bleeds. And they had an experimental surgery that they wanted to offer, a synovial vendectomy. They wanted to remove the synovial membrane in his ankle. Well, they'd been after Jonathan's mom and I to sign the papers for them to do that surgery. And every time I would question them, I'd push back on it, like Sam's talking about. You got to be responsible, like you're talking about, Stephen. Everyone needs to don't give your child over to the medical team, because sometimes the medical team will do. Doesn't mean they're dishonest by any stretch, but their perspective is different from yours. You're still the parent, and that's what I heard so much in what Sam shared a while ago. The love of a father is what made him stand out there 12 hours.
Yeah.
And anyway, the quick story. His ankle was having multiple bleeds, so they wanted to try this new surgery. Well, one day at clinic, there was like, if I recall, there was like, there were 4 doctors. Actually, there was a doctor, a physician's assistant that was part of the clinic was there, but then there was a orthopedic surgeon that was there, and then there were at least 3 other nurses in the room, and they, of all places, they took us to the chapel in the hospital. And they're trying to corner us and pressure Debbie and me to sign the consent form for them to do the surgery. Now, this has gone on for weeks, and I have pushed back, probably months. I had pushed back on it because I just had not been convinced. I don't know why. I just was not, it wasn't settled in, I wasn't seeing, they couldn't put before me the proof of the benefit. It was just still an experimental type thing.
Yeah,
well,
peace about it internally.
Yeah. So anyway, one of the doctors, I said, I'm just not sold. I said, I don't know how many patients you have. And one of them spoke up, said, we have about 700 patients in the clinic. I said, but I only have one son. And so this one doctor and his couple of nurses storm out of the room, and he's mad. And he says it loud enough for us to hear as he's leaving the chapel. He said, if these parents would just let us do what we know what we should be doing. And but the orthopedic surgeon was still there. And his name was Dr. Hamilton. And I said, Dr. Hamilton, I said, I will agree to this, but I want to ask you a question. Do you have children? He said, yes. I said, I want to know that if Jonathan were your son, would you do this surgery? It made him pause. He says, and he had 2 other intern doctors with him that were training. It made him pause, and he says, I'll get back with you in about 45 minutes. He went back with those 2 young doctors, looked at the x-rays. I don't know what all he did, but he came back, and this is what he answered me. He said, Mr. James, he says, if Jonathan were my son, I would wait. Well, that wasn't the end of the story. 2 years pass. Clinic again. That same Dr. Hamilton is in the rotation of the clinic. And he doesn't have to tell me this, but he had integrity. Him and Debbie and Jonathan and me were in the examination room that on just a normal clinic day, and he said, Mr. James, I have to tell you something. He said, I've just come back from a conference in Colorado. He said, he said, it has been determined that that particular surgery that we were suggesting has done more harm than good on patients. He said, you and your wife were the only 2 right in that room that day. That wasn't because we had medical knowledge. It was because we were parents. And we insisted on still being parents. And we also were trusting and looking and praying and seeking the Lord.
And it's so important that people need to realize that they have to surround themselves with a healthcare team they can trust.
Right.
And that's kind of what we set out to do. Is like, hey, we've been through a lot of these things, and we can give you our honest opinion. It may not be the best opinion, but it's our opinion that's someone
Sure.
that's lived through it. But also having healthcare providers. I mean, I'm not accusing any doctors of doing cutting on people when they didn't have to. But we live in this world where it's all about reimbursements,
Right.
and it's all about what can you bill for, and I can't help but worry like, hey, do sometimes they cut on people just because they need to meet their quota or they need to pay for the clinic, and maybe it wasn't entirely necessary, but a reimbursement of tens of thousands of dollars for this procedure versus your $100 or whatever the number may be for just an office visit and giving you a script for some anti-inflammatories or something. How do they take that into account? Well, we don't know. It very well can be happening, but trusting in your healthcare team, finding a good healthcare team that you can believe in, and not everyone goes to the same providers because some of them lack that trust. But I think a lot of people need to learn, like, you need to trust your team, because I had that situation that Jonathan was talking about where I needed elbow replacements.
Mm-hmm.
And they went to me, and one provider was like, hey, like, your elbows are bad.
Right.
And you need elbow replacements. And then the orthopedist like looks and he was honest with me, and I trust him because he's cut on so many hemophiliacs. And he literally went to me. He's like, Steven, if you get your elbow replaced, it's about as good enough just to tie your shoes, and that's about it. He's like, you're not going to be picking up your kids with it. You're not going to be doing this. You're not going to be doing that. And he recommended a different surgery where they did a radial head resection with a synovectomy. And he was like, look, it's a Band-Aid. It's not going to last forever, but hopefully it'll decrease the pain enough that something better comes along. And that's
Right.
pretty much our life is,
Buy you
like,
time.
something better keeps on coming.
Right.
It's really, you put up with it as long as you can, and then maybe something
Right.
better comes along, and then you decide for yourself what's the level of tolerance that you're going to allow yourself with the
Right.
pain and everything else. But trust is so important, and knowing and being able to trust in someone.
I believe those doctors meant well.
Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't question then, and I don't question today, looking back on it, that they were just trying to pay for the clinic. I didn't think that. I think they honestly, it was something new, something. They're surgeons. That's what they do.
Yeah.
So I didn't ever suspect of any ill will from them. I still had to be convinced as the parent before I was going to sign consent.
Yeah. And one of the things that we've been talking about and wanting to do is so many parents, single moms and single dads, which is more often now
Right.
than not.
Right.
We're trying to create a database and post it on our website to make it just public for whoever needs it. Say, look, if you need a dentist and you're in this parish,
Right.
like, you can find, because I can't tell you how many people, like Steven in the past went to a dentist for his whole life, and he basically omitted the fact for a long time that he was even a patient, a hemophiliac, because he knew the liability would get in that guy's head, and he'd go, man, I'm not really making but like $20, and I'm gonna potentially like lose my business over.
Oh, yeah.
It's not that he wasn't a good guy and wouldn't do
I
that.
understand it.
It's just there's so many people that have
Right.
said that same story.
Sure.
It's like, if I don't omit this information, then
Right.
my kid won't even get in for a cleaning.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's just one thing. Extractions are a whole different animal, which
Right.
we could deep dive into that all day.
But I'm not gonna lie. I might have purposely chosen not to disclose I was a hemophiliac solely on the purpose of, when I do, they tell me they can't do anything to me unless every single thing they do to me is coordinated with the hemophilia center, which is good when you're talking about extractions, root canals, implants, things of that nature. But it's like, I'm just trying to get a cleaning every 6 months.
Right.
So, I found a new clinic and I signed up, and I'm not suggesting this to anybody. And I just disclosed, I left off that fact, and I factored up before every appointment. And that would just usually be good enough. And it's funny because I have really healthy gums, at least when you look at it in person. But then they'll floss my teeth and I'm bleeding. It's like, man, you sure do bleed a lot for as healthy as your teeth or your gums are. I'm like, yeah, it's a known issue. And once again, I am not advocating for other people to
It's
do
just
this.
an aspirin problem.
I'm not advocating for other people to do this, but that is indeed a true story, and I hope none of my providers kick me out because of that. But you know, it's just something I had to do. And honestly, if I had to do something invasive, then I would coordinate
Sure,
care
sure.
and I would do everything. But for a cleaning, let's be honest, they're polishing your teeth and checking for cavities.
And I'm not calling you out, but I'm there. We've heard at all the events, you get people coming to you and me saying, we can't find a dentist.
Right.
We can't find, or we're going to have to drive to the other side. So we figure we'll start at home with Louisiana. We'll break it up into parishes and come up with a list of dentist, orthopedic surgeon, get specialists on there and create that key and then just post it for each parish in the state. And then hopefully we can fill in all those spots. And Jonathan was pumped when I was telling him about it. I'm like, I just got to find the people because you got to meet with them and then get them to agree with it in the first place. Yeah. And if we can get them to do that, I think it may help a lot of people. You know,
if you find them.
Finding them.
You were definitely. We ran into that problem with Jonathan early on, but so that's going to be the problem. Most of the dentists and they're just not.
Well, their whole lives are built
right.
around that business, and they could lose their license if something. I mean, no, I don't. I don't.
But at the same time, if you had some that are knowledgeable and
education's key.
That's why they can't fault us if you omit information on the cleaning. I don't want to hear anybody say anything.
and actually, it would reduce them from liability because they didn't know.
Yep, there you go. See,
but at the same time, it should still be disclosed. It's terrible that we have to do this, but it's the fact of the matter. It's just like the hemophiliacs that were divorced, even though they had a healthy relationship and things of that nature. It's sad that sometimes we put ourselves in situations that we shouldn't have to, but ultimately we do because it's survival.
Right.
And that's the gist of it, you know.
There's two stories that I've been asked to bring up. So before we end up running out of here at some point in time, because we could stay in here all day, and I would actually like to do it. But one was Stephen's given his perspective on connecting with him when he was so little, because we were sitting down and he was the speaker at the Hope Gala.
Yeah, so
and that's where we were.
So it was actually pretty funny because this is going back maybe 5 years, maybe.
Yeah,
and we're at a Hope Gala,
and
I remember you introducing me to your dad, and Mr. Stam goes to me, he's like, "He's the guy," and he's pointing at me. He goes, "Son, I've known you since you were this little."
No, wait, stop there. He's like, okay, go ahead. You can finish your part.
No lie. I was like, I've never heard this story. Like, tell me, And he's telling me about how he helped my parents and the Tulane linked them with your family to help us figure out navigating this whole disease state and not just the disease state, but the care associated with it, meaning that going through the hospital and the providers and everything else. And I come home, I'm like, wow, it's amazing. I had no idea, and I bring it up to my mom, and my parents are getting slightly older, and my mom's like, oh, she doesn't remember anything. And a week later, she's washing dishes, and she goes, man, Mr. Hawkins, Mr. Sam, it's like, I wonder what they're up to nowadays. They're such good people. And I'm like, just a week ago, I mentioned this, and she had no recollection. So it's funny. But yeah, I mean, if you don't mind, I would like to hear firsthand from you how that came about, because I'm curious myself.
Well, actually, it was Karen that initiated it, Karen Wolf. As soon as you were born and you were diagnosed, she called Jody, and she said, look, here's the situation. We got little Stephen Lee. They don't know what to do or how to do it. They don't have a strong support system medically. And she just expressed the fact, would we consider calling and just being an encouragement? We said, of course. We'll do anything that we can. It was mainly my wife, not me. And
this is 4 years after I was born.
Yeah.
You're 84 and I was 80. So there's a...
Yeah. It was in the first few weeks of your birth. Mm-hmm. And so your mom, Josh, called your mother, and I think they had several conversations about this, just from a practical level. Just number one here, number two this, number three that. And here's our number. You call if you ever need us. I don't remember ever having a phone call with your parents, but I know that my wife did.
Okay.
And it was just as simple as that. We were more than willing to do whatever we could for anyone. They never called us about a factor 8, only about a 9.
I think the fact that we were both non-severes clicked for
But,
Karen.
I think that's something you said that, hey, if they can continue something like that, and I've even offered it to the center, it's like, hey, I feel free if they want to give out my number or anything else.
I think they're scared, frankly. I think they're afraid of being sued.
Yeah, but the fact that they can put you in touch with someone that's gone through it already, so to help you navigate it, because I always like to use the big brother analogy. Is like, they've made the mistake, the bigger brother, like, so the little brother doesn't have to. He's learned from their lessons, and it's it's a thing that recurs in my life. I'm always talking about, like, hey, whether I've learned from my brother or whether my mistakes, I'm hoping the next generation doesn't make the same mistakes and they can learn from the lessons I've learned, because ultimately that's what we're here for. We're to help people and decrease anything that they're going through by knowledge.
Well, the number one issue that every parent has to deal with hemophilia, and David's already mentioned it numerous times, is fear.
Yeah.
You contend with an overwhelming backdraft sense of fear, like you're going to open the door and a fire is going to consume you, and it's on you day and night. It never leaves you. You hear your child cry, you run. Mm-hmm. You don't find them, you go looking, because you're trying to be the person that can help prevent that moment from happening when life transitions. It's just that simple. And until you can contend with that and overcome that, you're going to be an emotional train wreck. And most parents are. And they get after each other. They don't realize what's happening to them. They become fatigued emotionally, and they get overwhelmed by it. And a sense of fear can just destroy your relationship. And you have to have harmony in your home. You have to have unity. You have to be in agreement about what you're doing and how you're doing it. And people who are under a tremendous burden of fear have trouble doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're always second-guessing themselves on everything. Mm-hmm. That is one of the biggest issues, is just dealing with the emotional trauma of having to consistently, because it never leaves. David said it a few minutes ago, it's on you 24/7. It's never gone. It's never out of your mind. It's never out of your purview. It's there. And I think helping people initially with that is one of the biggest issues, one of the biggest help factors for a parent.
Which is really ultimately why we wanted to do this, is because if someone like that we met at the Capitol, mm-hmm. with a new child is consumed with that fear, hopefully this would be right. Just the idea of being able to, I know for the young lady that we met, mm-hmm. with the child, which is extremely sweet, and I thought it was awesome that they were there, mm-hmm. Because it showed the type of people that they were. And after we got to talk to him for a while, and I was hopeful that before we left, in case we didn't see him again anytime soon, that we would be an encouragement just by being there and processing what was going on. And again, that's why we wanted to do this, was because if you take the situation today, not just the therapies, you have so many different options where we were so limited. Everything was plasma derived in a time where it was extremely scary anyway, because of HIV and hepatitis being so rampant, and not knowing that all they really needed to do is heat treat the medication. So it doesn't matter either way, but being born today with having a severe 8 or 9 is so different. And the idea of this was really just to encourage people to let them know, like, we survived the crazy of all that, and you guys did as parents, and you're sane and awesome, and so did your wives, who we're going to drag on next. But hopefully this is an encouragement to a lot of people to say, like, if they could get through that, then we can definitely get through this and become more of a support structure, hopefully, as we move forward.
And with new factors, new therapies, lives are getting even more and more normal. But, kids are going to be able to play sports. I grew up in the bubble boy period of time. Even though Josh was able to be active, my parents were not as loose with me. I guess you could, like they made me just sit on the sofa while all my cousins were playing basketball outside. But sure enough, every time I played basketball, I rolled my ankle. So maybe that was a good thing. But it's one of these things that, for words of encouragement for this new generation or the new parents out there, is that the therapies are constantly getting better. Prophylaxis is key. And we're going to have about as normal as a life as any generation's ever had. Well, definitely more than any previous generation. Yeah. But it's getting to a point where the outlook is bright, and don't be depressed, or don't, yes, we'll all have our challenges, but between a competent healthcare group, people you can trust, faith in the Lord, everything else, we'll navigate it, and you'll get through it, and things will come along.
And for anyone out there that is going through that, we can drag them into to helping at any point in time, because I know Dad's offered it often. It's just like, look, you get a parent at the hospital with a newborn. If they, if the hematology staff is good with it, like, just call us. So, and us being parents, even though we don't have hemophiliac children ourselves, just going through that, again, whatever we can do for anyone out there, that's what we want to do. And so the idea is we get your wives to come on after this. And then at some point in time, I wanted to make it a little bit larger setting where we had all y'all at the same time, because I think that's when we'll go into the other thing I was going to bring up was a story about me and my cast. I had like 10 different people reach out and go.
Lord.
So like that's just one story, but Jonathan and I talk all the time. He's got his own, so I wanted to bring you into that as well. So we'll leave people. I've told it a little bit, but not from your perspective. So we'll leave that for next time. But we appreciate y'all coming out here and taking the time. I think we already went way longer than we were planning on, but I could do this all day because I really like to get more information.
I thank y'all for taking the time out of your day to be here with us. It's been great. A lot of knowledge, a lot of preface to our lives. Understanding of what y'all went through, because we were infants. We didn't know.
Right.
Wow. I mean, y'all stood your ground. You stayed tough. Remained faithful, and everything. It worked out for the best of all.
Yeah.
Thanks for allowing us to come.
Yes.
I'm excited about the future with this too. So, all right, everybody, we appreciate it. See you soon.